This is the third milestone. This one was adding aesthetics. As you can see, I'm already up to 99% network, so when I add the enemies, I'm probably gonna have to scale down a bit on the cosmetics. The problem is, because it's such a large map, the only way to make it look like it's lived in is to add a lot of fine details. But the more fine details you add, the less room you have for anything else. But we'll give it a look, see what it looks like. I think it looks pretty good so far. This milestone was strictly aesthetic, so a lot of the things like the doors working and different activating effects and events aren't going to be implemented yet. This is just to see what it looks like, and it's honestly probably a good thing that it was just that, because we'll know everything that's added from here on out is mandatory, and therefore we can start cutting out some of the aesthetic. If it ever loads. There's a couple of things like an intro and enemy effect or objectives and things like that that I'd like to add also, and I'm not sure how that affects the network, but we'll give it a look. So I'm going to stay a little quieter unless I'm explaining something important, because there's also a lot of sound effects that I added, and lighting and props. One of the most important places I wanted to make certain that I decorated was anywhere on Mars, because obviously you can't make Mars look like Mars unless you really doll it up to pretend, since this is just a lab room. So there's a lot of puffs of smoke, there's lights all over the place, there's a ramp, and I wanted to make sure that this still looked like the front of the facility, so I added a bunch of debris and canisters and boxes and things like that. There's a little Easter egg of where the workers would go to take their break. All the lights stop flickering and all sound effects have been turned off. And this is your introduction to your first enemy. The enemy is not even facing you, and he is significantly further away from you, giving you more than enough time to shoot him down to figure out what you're supposed to do in the first place. The doors are locked, which means you have to spend the time to at least attack him. Just him. And then they unlock. Again, enemies haven't been implemented yet. That was more just for testing of difficulty and making sure the doors activate the way they should. So a lot of the more empty rooms, like this passageway right here, while it looks empty, will have a couple of enemies. And the point is, if there's nothing to see, there's probably something to fight. If there's plenty to see, chances are there won't be anything that's super important. So each doorway, in order for you to be able to enjoy the view, actually has a couple of blocking triggers. And, for example, when I enter this one, the room lights up. It's slow and it's natural and it matches the light that was already on the ceiling, so it should be subtle. But this gives you the feel of what happened in here. Obviously there was barricades that got shoved out of the way, and, well, no one in here had a good time. The point of this room, because it's going to be one of the rooms that don't actually have any fights, is that it will have the ammo canister from earlier. There's the guard that was in charge of this room who didn't do so well. And then when you leave the blocking barrier, it goes back to a dark room. Something to see while you're going through the level. It is a ritual being performed either on or by the factory workers here, but at least they had their beers with them. This is a scripted event. Once again, having little corner rooms like this, it was hard to come up with anything that was actually interesting. So there's just little things like an open fire next to all these explosives. If you choose to skip them, they go off. It destroys the canister that was on fire, the original fire, and then spawns a bigger one. And then entering this room gives everything the green tint. The green is because of the fact that this is supposed to be the plant growing room. So they've got computers, they've got some books, but for the most part the focal point is they've got the plants growing in their little incubators. Once again, this room will probably have a zombie or two, maybe an imp. But that's why it needs to be a little more wide open, and that's not really the point of the room, is to look at anything. It is supposed to be fairly wide open so that you have plenty of room to shoot. So, when you go back outside, same outside vibe as the other section. It's dusty, it's loud. I was thinking of adding anything to this one, but honestly, because this is supposed to more or less just be outside, there's not a whole lot to add. And I also had given it a shot of adding like hell rocks and things like that to add to the aesthetic, but the problem is hell rocks are very pale and very obviously stacked up bricks that doesn't really get the point across. So I realized with the sound and the fog, honestly, this kind of fulfills the purpose that it's meant to, so adding any more would just fill up the network capability without actually adding anything worthwhile. Coming back inside cancels it. Lights are back to normal. And you're good to go. Leaving the Arboreum, it turns everything dark again. This room is supposed to be an imp fight, so again, there's not a huge reason to fill it with cosmetics. With the Snapmap editor, so much of it is cosmetic already that, yeah, I could have coated it in blood, stem to stern, I could have flooded it with dead bodies, but also the idea was not supposed to be that everyone got immediately massacred and this was a huge, bustling facility. It was just an outskirts one that Doom Dude was happened to get sent to, and so you're going to be fighting imps in here if you hadn't gotten rid of the nest. Otherwise, it's just a burning down section of the building. Which would take you back to the entrance. However, I want to also give the entrance its debut. So in the second path you can take, if you don't take the Arboreum path, the way that you come in is flooded with smoke. The sides themselves are venting steam, and then the room itself is flooded with smoke. This is connecting from in here. So if you shot the zombie and went straight, the room is flooded with smoke, which would make a good eerie effect while fighting more zombies, because you can't see them as well, you don't know when they're going to jump out, and so while it could be flooded with blood, again, the idea wasn't that in every single room there happened to be 10 people who each one of them got horribly massacred. That wouldn't really make sense. The idea was, in almost the split second that the facility was overrun, everybody who was where they were got killed off, and everybody else gathered in smaller rooms. So, taking the main control path, there's steam and sparks. With equipment, this is actually a T-junction exit, so when you flood this with equipment, it just makes it look like this was a dead end and not a door that was supposed to have a purpose. I was going to make some of the rooms a little brighter like I did the other one, but honestly the dark vibe is a little more necessary, especially in rooms like this where there's enough design that you don't need to add dead bodies and things like that. You don't need to see anything also, so keeping it dark just keeps the moody feel. Again, most of these rooms will also have an enemy in it, which will add to the, something to look at. But every room that's going to have hell things related to it will also have a doorway that represents it, so you can recognize, wherever I'm going now must have been an issue, and that is when you'll enter the room with the big guy. I don't feel like killing him to prove a point, but that room's got decorations in it too. Oh, fine. Let's give it a look. I had a feeling. Probably should have just turned him off. Okay, now I can look at the room. But that's exactly the point, is that while you're in the middle of fighting something like that, I want to make sure that the cosmetic is important, but gameplay in Doom especially is significantly more important, so if I have to delete a couple of cosmetics in order to make the programming work, I'm absolutely willing to do that. I want to make sure I do it from places that aren't quite as important, but there are still dead bodies, there's the gore nest, there's the coat of blood all over it. This was the control room with the guard that got blown away. But again, for example, something like that, while it would be a bit of a shame to lose him, because obviously he adds the fact that there was somebody in here when the monsters started appearing, if it's a replacement of him versus more monsters, obviously the more monsters will obviously always come first. So, going into the control room, there's a handful of crates and stuff in the corners. They're not seeable, and those would be the kind of things that go first. However, I do want this area to look lived in, so the more I can keep, the better. That actually leads to a secret section, which I didn't want players going to, so I added a couple of crates for the aesthetic of you not being allowed to go back there, but also a blocking volume to make sure you can't. The idea is that you're just supposed to be creeping through a eerie place, not discovering super secrets. So again, rooms like this, they don't really need that much because there's probably going to be a monster or two. So there's sparks, there's steam, there's very little cosmetic just to keep it interesting. But again, you'll be fighting your way through this and you'll have no reason to backtrack this direction because there is a door. Or a key card. So, from the block off earlier, there's a shredded up room. If I've got the network for it later, I would like to add a couple of zombies that you don't even need to fight because they're blocked in there and there's no way for you to get in. But that's to show that all the higher-ups were trying to block themselves off in the hospital. This is a powered-off generator, which will be powered on when you get the chance. Poor guard had the keycard that we needed. Good for him. So, everything says error until you turn it on. Rerouting power. And now the main door's open with that powered on. The lights are also turning back on, and now you know that the main way that you were meant to go in the first place is available. You've also got the blue key card for the blue door. Camera changes color again because it's supposed to be a little more hazy. You're not supposed to be quite as confident as Doom Guy when you're coming through here. So a lot of the aesthetic, again, for this kind of place is already taken care of. I wanted to make certain that it was the empty-looking areas, like dead ends, that had cosmetic back in the science lab, whereas Hell, because it already has so much, it's got the torches, it's got electricity, it's got blood all over the place anyway that's dripping from half of everything. There's sparks in the air. It doesn't really need my input, so if I can make it fit, I would like to add a couple of ideas here and there, but for the most part, because it already looks so good, it would be better if this room was just flooded with enemies than if it was flooded with cosmetic. So we're going to have to see what the balance of how many enemies to how many bits of, aesthetic I can. So that means that this is relatively the same. There's a gore pile at the end of this for effect, because this is supposed to be where they've been gathering everything. If I had the, storage room for it, I would flood this with significantly more dead bodies, but it already gets the point across. Like, what would I add? I can add some of these strings manually, but they're right there. I could add blood on the ground, but it's already flooded. So, for the most part, Hell is going to remain roughly the same, but again, if I have room, I will add more. So, that's milestone number 3, and milestone number 4 will mark us over. Thanks for watching.
So